Namaste. It is Akayani of Akayani Music, and it is Monday, September 13th. Today is a special day. It happens to be Radhastami, and this is the first Mantra Monday we are having after covering, the universal form. Previously, we were doing the Bhagavad Gita as it is. This is the Bhakti Yoga text compiled by Srila Vyasadeva and translated with commentary with A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So this is in the line of the Sri Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. So if you are a little familiar with Bhakti Yoga, or if you're not familiar with Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti Yoga is considered to be the topmost rung on the yoga ladder. So most people are introduced to the practice of yoga through performing different postures, different asanas, also breath work. And there are different stages which ultimately are there to help one quiet the mind, focus the mind, so one can put one's attention, within. So ultimately, we are trying to differentiate between the soul and the super soul, right? Our own individual soul, our self, because of course we're not the body. We are spirit soul. The spirit soul is eternal. And, the super soul. Who is the super soul? The super soul is that form of the Lord that accompanies us throughout our life, or throughout our lifetimes, journey after journey after journey that we take here in this material world, trying to find happiness, trying to find perfect and complete happiness, which we all know as adults is a challenge. Even as children, we know that this can be a challenge. So ultimately, we are trying to go home. We are trying to go home, back to Godhead, back to our original home, where there is sublime variegatedness and activity. We're not bored, but at the same token, things remain the same, meaning we don't have to undergo birth, death, disease, and old age. We don't have to try and hang on to our youth by undergoing cosmetic surgeries or Botox injections or crazy exercise programs or any of those things, because we always are youthful. We are youthful because that is our original state, because the spiritual body never, how shall I say, it's not subject to the laws of material nature. It's transcendent, it's transcendental, because the person of whom we are made in the image of, God, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is always appearing as a fresh youth. It says that Krishna appears as a fresh youth, no more than 16 years old, even though he is literally the oldest. He is the original Nara, right? Narayan. He's the original person. So that is what's bringing us to the topic today. The topic today is the City of Nine Gates, and this is an allegorical story of King Puranjana. And King Puranjana is a personality that once again represents us, that represents, every man, every woman. And this allegory appears in the 4th canto of the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, chapters 25 through 29. So this is very, very lengthy and very detailed story that is told, you see here, by Narada Muni, and he is talking to King, let me see if I can pronounce this king's name properly, King Prachini, who lived during another age, who lived during the time of Satya Yuga. And King Prachini was intelligent enough to understand that he was kind of going down the wrong path. He wasn't kind of, he was going down the wrong path because he was heavily entangled in a lot of fruitive activities. He was entangled in a process called karma kanda. So we don't know this so much here in the West, but there are different processes you can follow depending on what it is you're trying to achieve, what it is that your ultimate goal is that you're trying to achieve. So people that are just after, wealth, they engage in this process of karma kanda, but it's a very fine line. It has to be done perfectly, otherwise you end up entangling yourself in some pretty bad reactions. And in the case of Maharaj Puranjana, with going into too much detail, he was involved with the process of animal sacrifice. And Narada Muni, taking compassion upon him, because he was actually a descendant of a pure devotee of Maharaj Dhruva, decided to step in and alert him and try to enlighten him on what his situation was, and try to steer him to the ultimate path of life, which is to get out of the cycle of birth and death. So that's the background, because you will find when you get into, how shall I say, Vaishnava culture, or the culture of yoga, bhakti yoga, there is always a story. There's a story within a story within a story. There is a series of events. These stories that we're being told don't just come out of nowhere. They're actually involving real people. So this allegory of King Puranjana and the city of 9 gates is what is relayed to King Puranjana. And this is a way that Narada Muni is instructing him without, sort of confronting him directly and making him feel badly. There is a way to instruct people through story, which allows us, I should say, to be more open and to hear without feeling like, on the defensive. So this is a common technique in teaching. Now, I am going to be drawing on a couple of sources here. I've already shown you the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, but also there was another wonderful article by Dhruta Prabhu, called The City of 9 Gates, which you can find online at krishna.com. And this was a presentation that he originally gave at a big conference called Toward a Science of Consciousness, which was an international conference attended by leading scientists, physicians, philosophers, scholars, hosted by the University of Arizona in Tucson in April of 1996. And I think Dhruta does a wonderful job here of kind of condensing this presentation of death, how to understand death, how to understand life, how to understand consciousness, the role of monism and the role of dualism, and then also just breaking down this whole allegory. So this is an elephant here. This is a huge question that we're trying to answer here or tackle here, which ultimately every one of us is going to have to face. Every one of us is going to die. I'm going to die. You're going to die. The people you know are going to die. Your pets are going to die. Everything goes through this cycle of death. And it's important to know where you're going in life, right? If you don't know where you're going in life, then you become lost. So here's a shout out to Kafunya Ife, who was interested in this. Now, there's also, in this particular topic, I'm wanting to address this. Now, there is also another article which I found and am now researching for, which goes through the actual description and process of what it's like for the soul to leave the body. So, of any of you watching who perhaps are nurse practitioners or who have had the privilege of actually being with a loved one as they have left the body, you notice certain things that happen. For example, usually before the soul is preparing to leave the body, people will stop eating, right? They'll stop eating, and then days before, they'll stop drinking water. And this is a process which actually helps the soul leave the body. Also, you may have witnessed someone taking their last breath, right? Their last breath or exhalation, the body becoming tense before the soul leaves the body. Perhaps you have heard the death rattle, right? There's a lot to this process. However, of course, today I was not able to find that particular article, which really was the way I kind of wanted to start out, to try and start out with the process and then kind of reverse engineer through Canto 4, Chapter 25 through 29, talking about Maharaj Puranjana. All that said, I guess everything happens for a reason, so I'm just going to get into it. I am not going to read a lot of the Sanskrit this morning. I want to get through a certain amount of verses here to kind of set the stage, and then we're going to go backwards, or I should say I'm going to backtrack and go through that. However, I will read verse 10 from chapter 25 in Sanskrit and then move forward from there. So this is Narada Muni addressing Maharaj Pratinibarhishat. It goes like this, and you can follow along on the description. Āsīt purañjano nāmā, rājā hac-chravāh, tasyāvijñāta-nāmāsīt, sakhāvijñāta-ces itah. Again. Āsīt purañjano nāmā, rājā hac-chravāh, tasyāvijñāta-nāmāsīt, sakhāvijñāta-ces itah. Āsīt purañjano nāmā, rājā hac-chravāh, tasyāvijñāta-nāmāsīt, sakhāvijñāta-ces itah. Now I'm going to read the word-for-word translation. Āsīt, there was. Puranjana, Purañjana, nāmā, named. Rājā, king. Rājan, O king. hac-chravāh, whose activities were great. Tasya, his. Avijñāta, the unknown one. Nāmā, of the name. Āsīt, there was. Sakhā, friend. Avijñāta, unknown. Jetistatah, whose activities. Translation. My dear king, once in the past lived a king named Puranjana, who was celebrated for his great activities. He had a friend named Avijñāta, the unknown one. No one could understand the activities. Avijñāta. Purport. Every living entity is Puranjana. The word Puram means within this body, within this form, and Jana or Jan means living entity. Thus everyone is Puranjana. Every living entity is supposed to be the king of his body, because a living entity is given full freedom to use his body as he likes. He usually engages his body for sense gratification because one who is in the bodily conception of life feels that the ultimate goal of life is to serve the senses. This is the process of karma kanda. One who has no inner knowledge, who does not know that he is actually the spirit soul living within the body, who is simply enamored by the dictation of the senses, is called a materialist. A materialistic person interested in sense gratification can be called a purañjana. Because such a materialistic person utilizes his senses according to his whims, he may also be called a king. An irresponsible king takes the royal position to be his personal property and misuses his treasury for sense gratification. Okay, now I'm going to move on to text 11. King Puranjana began to search for a suitable place to live, and thus he traveled all over the world. Even after a great deal of traveling, he could not find a place just to his liking. Finally, he became morose and disappointed. So this is really an explanation of how the soul wanders throughout the universes. There's millions and millions and millions of universes, stars, planets, and different types of bodies. And finally, being able to come to the human form of life is extremely, extremely rare. But this is done after quite some time, because once we leave the spiritual world, we want to be happy. That is the nature of the soul. But we wanted to try different things. And so it's explained here that just on this Earth planet, there are 8,400,000 species of life, and millions and trillions of planets within the creation. The living entity wanders throughout these various types of bodies, throughout different planets, and thus he is like the king, Puranjana, who traveled all over the world looking for a suitable place to live. Finally, let's see, in text 12, it explains King Puranjana had unlimited desires for sense enjoyment. Consequently, he traveled all over the world to find a place where all his desires could be fulfilled. Unfortunately, he found a feeling of insufficiency everywhere. Isn't that the truth, right? We get to a place and we think we're going to be happy there, and it seems okay in the beginning, but then after some time, we begin to find deficiencies, right? Or if you're someone who's well-traveled, someone who travels from place to place, you get to one place, you think, oh, this is nice. They have this and that, but they don't have this and that and the other thing like they did in such and such a place, right? So you stay for some time and then you leave to go experience things that you may be feeling like you're missing. And then you go to the next place. And then you enjoy there for a little while, but then after some time, you're feeling that it's deficient, right? Yes, they have this and that, but they don't have this and this and this. So you leave and you go to the next place. So this is our position as a spirit soul in the material world, is that we are never satisfied. We aren't satisfied because we're not actually in the proper atmosphere, right? We are an eternal soul driving a vehicle made out of flesh and blood and mucus and bile, right? And we are, again, subject to different conditions here and circumstances here, which make our living here challenging, to say the least. So trying to satisfy ourselves just through the process of material sense gratification with society, friendship, and love is compared to a drop of water falling on a desert, right? it's not really going to satisfy us. Even if we find what we consider to be the perfect situation, things happen, right? People leave, people die, there's changes in the town or the city that are not to our liking that we live in. And so it is in our own material body. Okay, so then it's described in text 13 that finally, while wandering in this way, he saw on the southern side of the Himalayas, in a place named Bharatavarsha, India, a city that had 9 gates all about and was characterized by all auspicious facilities. So this is a description of a soul being able to take birth in India, right, which is considered to be a very auspicious place in terms of spiritual knowledge and spiritual advancement, because in general, India is free of a lot of the material distractions that we find here in the Western world. So in the Western world, we have a lot of material facility, everything from amazing phones, you know, that can do practically everything for us, or so many things for us, control the devices in our home, what to speak of email, give us reminders, provide us with directions, and so on and so forth, what to speak of all the other material facilities we have. But the difficulty here in the West is that we can become distracted by that and forget what the aim of life is. So in places like India, where it's more austere and where there is a very, very long tradition of self-realization, the atmosphere is more conducive for us to actually make progress on a spiritual path, on a path of progressive understanding. So it's also explaining in this verse again how fortunate we are to actually attain the human form of life, because in the human form of life, you can actually understand who you are, what the purpose of your life is. And because the human form of life is filled with such highs and lows, with such comparisons and contrasts, it's also an impetus to look within. We have that facility. In text 14, it says, that city was surrounded by walls and parks, and within it were towers, canals, windows, and outlets. The houses there were decorated with domes made of gold, silver, and iron. Okay, so now we are getting into it. Now we are understanding that this city of 9 gates and what was being described here is saying that the body is protected by walls of skin. The hairs on the body are compared to parks, and the highest parts of the body, like the nose and the head, are compared to towers. The wrinkles and depressions on different parts of the body are compared to trenches or canals. The eyes are compared to windows, and the eyelids are compared to protective gates. The 3 types of metal, gold, silver, and iron, represent the 3 modes of material nature. Gold represents goodness, silver, passion, and iron, ignorance. So these are the 3 gunas, right? We are conditioned by these 3 modes of material nature. And you'll see this in prominence in different personalities and different people, usually based on the kinds of work that they do, right? So people that are more conditioned by the mode of goodness, for example, are very interested in pursuing, intellectual activities or reading or scholarly activities, for example. This is compared to the head of society. You need a cool head to understand and navigate your way through life. And so we need the advice of teachers. We need the advice of people that are expert in different fields to help us navigate through those things. So gold is the representative of this sattva gun. Then we have the mode of passion, right? Rajagun. So these are people that are always in hot pursuit of some project. Typically people that are involved in the occupations of, let's say, building, right? Building and destroying, real estate people, or even people that are involved in military pursuits, or people that are involved in administrative pursuits. Kshatriyas, this is all considered to fall into the realm of the mode of passion. You're never really satisfied. You're always restless. It's hard for you to stay in one place. It's hard for you to keep on doing the same thing, day after day after day. And then there's then there is iron. So that is ignorance. So ignorance, people that may be very lethargic, maybe prone to depression, indolence, sleep. People that are, living in dirty circumstances, or, you come to a place and it's not cleaned properly. There's things everywhere. This is some of the symptoms of the mode of ignorance. Also, the kinds of foods that are being consumed in this mode. We've talked about this before. You can learn more about that in the Bhagavad Gita. I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. He goes on to say the body is also sometimes considered to be a bag containing 3 elements, tridhatu, mucus, bile, and air. So if you study Ayurveda, you know about kapha, pitta, and vayu. Yasyatma buddhi kunapi tridhatuke. So according to the Bhagavatam, one considers this bag of mucus, bile, and air to be the self, is considered to be no better than, a cow or an ass, right? So it goes on to say, Nila, Svatika, Vaidurya, Mukta, Maraka, Rattarunai, Kripta, Hamya, Staram, Diptam, Shriya, Bhagavatam, Miva. The floors of the houses in that city were made of sapphire, crystal, diamonds, pearls, emeralds, and rubies. Because of the luster of the houses in the capital, the city was compared to the celestial town named Bhogavati. Okay, so in the city of the body, the heart is considered to be the capital, just as the capital of a state is especially gorgeously filled with various high buildings and lustrous palaces. The heart of the body is filled with various desires and plans for material enjoyment. Such plans are sometimes compared to valuable jewels, such as sapphires, rubies, pearls, and emeralds. The heart becomes a center for all planning for material enjoyment, right? So we're born into a particular body. We're born into a particular body because of previous desires, because of previous activities, right? Because of karma, right? Because of actions that we took in a previous lifetime, and we are awarded a particular type of body. But of course, we take birth in a particular body because there are different desires that we want to act out. And so they are compared here to different precious gems. It goes on to say, in that city, there were many assembly houses, street crossings, streets, restaurants, gambling houses, markets, resting places, flags, festoons, and beautiful parks. All these surrounded the city. In this way, the capital is described. In the capital, there are assembly houses and many squares, many street crossings, avenues and streets, many gambling places, markets, and places of rest, all decorated with flags and festoons. The squares are surrounded with railings and are devoid of trees. The heart of the body can be compared to the assembly house, for the living entity is within the heart along with the Paramatma, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita. The heart is the center of all remembrance, forgetfulness, and deliberation. In the body, the eyes, the ears, and the nose are different places of attraction for sense enjoyment, and the streets for going hither and thither may be compared to different types of air blowing within the body. The yogic process for controlling the air within the body and the different nerves is called Sushumna, the path of liberation. The body is also a resting place because when the living entity becomes fatigued, he takes rest within the body. The palms and the soles of the feet are compared to flags and festoons. Then it goes on to say that on the outskirts of that city, there were many beautiful trees and creepers encircling a nice lake. Also surrounding that lake were many groups of birds and bees that were always chanting and humming. So now the analogy gets into arrangements for the sexual impulse and sex desire. Since the body is a great city, there must be various arrangements such as lakes and gardens for sense enjoyment of the various parts of the body. Those which incite sexual impulses are referred to here indirectly. Because the body has genitals, when the living entity attains the right age, be he man or woman, he becomes agitated by the sex impulse. As long as one remains a child, he is not agitated by seeing a beautiful woman or a handsome man. Although the sense organs are present, unless the age is ripe, there is no sex impulse. The favorable conditions surrounding the sex impulse are compared here to a garden or a nice solitary park. Okay, then it goes on in text 18. The branches of the trees standing on the bank of the lake received particles of water carried by the spring air from the falls coming down from the icy mountain. In this verse, the words hima nirhara is particularly significant. The waterfall represents a kind of liquid humor or rasa, relationship. In the body, there are different types of humors, rasas, or mellows. The supreme mellow is called the sexual mellow, arirasa. When this arirasa or sex desire comes in contact with the spring air, moved by Cupid, it becomes agitated. In other words, all these are representations of rupa, rasa, gandha, shabda, and sparsha. The wind is sparsha, or touch. The waterfall is rasa, or taste. The spring air, kushamarkara, is smell. All these varieties of enjoyment make life pleasing, and thus we become captivated by material existence. Then it goes on to describe, there's an allegory for family life. It's an allegory. In such an atmosphere, even the animals of the forest become non-violent and non-envious like great sages. Consequently, the animals did not attack anyone. Over and above everything was the cooing of the cuckoos. Any passenger passing along that path was invited by that atmosphere to take rest in that nice garden. The purport: a peaceful family with wife and children is compared to the peaceful atmosphere of the forest. Children are compared to non-violent animals. Sometimes, however, wives and children are called svajanakyadashu, burglars in the name of kinsmen. A man earns his livelihood with hard labor, but the result is that he is plundered by his wife and children, exactly as a person in a forest is attacked by some thieves and burglars who take his money. Nonetheless, in family life, the turmoil of wife and children appears to be like the cooing of the cuckoos in the garden of family life. Being invited by such an atmosphere, the person who is passing through such a blissful family life desires to have his family with him at all costs. So then it gets to text 20, which describes, while wandering here and there in that wonderful garden, King Puranjana suddenly came in contact with a very beautiful woman who was walking there without any engagement. She had 10 different servants with her, and each servant had hundreds of wives accompanying them. So what does this mean? The body has already been compared to a beautiful garden. During youth, the sex impulse is awakened, and the intelligence, according to one's imagination, is prone to contact the opposite sex. In youth, a man or a woman is in search of the opposite sex by intelligence or imagination, if not directly. The intelligence influences the mind, and the mind controls the 10 senses. 5 of these senses gather knowledge, and 5 work directly. Each sense has many desires to be fulfilled. This is the position of the body and the owner of the body, Puranjana, who is within the body. Okay, then it says, the woman was protected on all sides by a 5-hooded snake. She was very beautiful and young, and she appeared very anxious to find a suitable husband. The vital force of the living entity includes the 5 kinds of air working within the body, which are known as prana, apana, vyana, samana, and udana. The vital force is compared to a serpent because a serpent can live simply by drinking air. The vital force carried by the air is described as the pratyahara, or the bodyguard. Without the vital force, one cannot live for a moment. Indeed, all the senses are working under the protection of the vital force, right? So the breath is extremely important. Ultimately, that is what's keeping us alive. When the breath leaves the body is done. The body is finished. So yogis work also hard to control this breath, to understand how this breath works. Also, it is recommended that if one is having mental disturbances, that one focus on breath work, which can help stabilize the mind. The woman who represents intelligence was searching after a husband. You remember in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna says in the opulence is of the absolute, that among women, he is intelligence and memory and patience, right? This indicates that intelligence cannot act without consciousness. So again, it says here that the woman, represented by this queen in the garden, was searching after a husband, right? A beautiful woman needs to be protected by the proper husband. Intelligence must always be very fresh. Therefore, the word aprodam, very young, is used here. Material enjoyment means utilizing the intelligence for the sake of rupa, rasa, gandha, shabda, and sparsha, or form, taste, smell, sound, and touch. So this is an allegorical way of explaining how consciousness, or how the soul, interacts with the intelligence and the mind and the senses, the working senses and the knowledge acquiring senses. So now I'm going to go to the article by Dhruta Karma, because Dhruta Karma does a great job of explaining and breaking this down. Okay. He goes through a lot of explanation here, and he even gets into our understanding in the Western world about dualism, and gives a little, how shall I say, understanding through Descartes, through Cartesian philosophy and all of that. But I'm going to skip right now to the section in the article on page 2 called The Attractive City, okay? Eventually, Puranjana comes to a place called Navadvarapura, the city of 9 gates. He finds it quite attractive. The city of 9 gates represents the male human body with its 9 openings. It also can represent the female body as too, but here specifically, the king obviously possesses male genitalia, so that's why it's saying the male body, but you can swap it out, okay? The city of 9 gates represents the male human body with its 9 openings. We have 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, the mouth, the anus, and the genitals. As Purañjana wanders through the gardens of the city, he encounters an extremely beautiful woman. Purañjana is attracted to her, and she is attracted to him. She becomes his queen. Puranjana, as we have seen, represents the conscious self. The beautiful woman represents buddhi, or intelligence, right? So we're familiar with this word buddhi, Buddha, right? Buddhism, which actually means using your intelligence properly to understand yourself, the atma, who your real self is. Puranjana, as we have seen, represents the conscious self. The beautiful woman represents buddhi, intelligence. According to the philosophy of the Bhagavata Purana, intelligence is a subtle material energy with discriminatory capabilities like those manifested by artificial intelligence machines. The attraction between King Puranjana and the queen, between the conscious self and the intelligence, is the root of embodied consciousness. The king, it should be noted, has distinct conscious selfhood with non-material sensory capability, but this capability becomes dormant when he begins his relationship with the queen. In other words, when we inhabit a material body, we become covered over by the intelligence and the mind, by the false ego, right? And then suddenly we're interfacing through the senses that are grouped around the mind. The queen, the subtle material element called intelligence, allows Puranjana, the conscious self, to enjoy the city of 9 gates, the gross physical body. Employing a computer analogy, we might say Puranjana represents the user, the city of 9 gates, the computer hardware, and the queen, the software that allows the user to interface with the hardware or use it for practical purposes. The queen is not alone, however, but is accompanied by 11 bodyguards and a serpent with 5 heads. The bodyguards comprise the mind and the 10 senses. The 10 senses are made up of 5 knowledge acquiring senses and the 5 working senses. The 5 knowledge acquiring senses are the senses of sight, right? Eyes, smell, taste, hearing, and touch, skin. The 5 working senses are those of walking, grasping, speaking, reproduction, and evacuation. All 10 senses are grouped around the mind and are considered servants of the mind. Each of these servants has hundreds of wives. The wives represent desires for material experiences, and the senses act under their pressure. Are you with me here? I'd love it if you guys would make some comments or questions about this. Okay, the senses and the sense organ. According to the philosophy of the Bhagavata Purana, the senses are different from the physical sense organs. The senses, along with the mind and intelligence, are part of the invisible, subtle material covering of the soul. The physical organs of sensation, eyes, nose, tongue, ears, skin, legs, arms, mouth, anus, and genitals, are part of the gross physical body. The distinction between the subtle senses and the physical sense organs is important and offers consciousness researchers a valuable conceptual tool. Let us consider, for example, the problem of phantom limbs. I'm going to open the window because it is a little stuffy in here. Excuse me. Speaking of senses. My senses are telling me that I'm thirsty and that I need to drink some water. My other senses were telling me that it was not enough oxygen in this room and that I needed to open the window. So this is an example of how the intelligence and the mind and the senses are all working together with the gross body. Okay. Persons whose legs or arms have been amputated often report that they distinctly feel the missing limb and even the experience quite distinct sensations such as twinges of pain or itching. The City of Nine Gates allegory provides an explanation for this mysterious phenomenon. Let's take the case of someone whose arm has been amputated but still feels the presence of the arm. The arm is one of the working senses. It is composed of two elements: the subtle grasping sense and the physical organ of the arm and hand. Amputation removes the physical organ through which the subtle senses operates, but the subtle sense itself remains, and therefore its presence may be mentally perceived. Since the subtle sense is material, it may be able to act upon gross physical matter without going through the related material sense organ. This model may therefore explain some of the phenomenon reported in connection with ghosts and apparitions and in connection with mediums, particularly the mysterious movement of physical objects. This model may also explain how persons are able to experience sense data during near-death experiences when the physical sense organs are incapacitated because of anesthesia or shock. Okay, so anyway, the senses are compared to attendants of the queen. They serve her by bringing information and performing activity. Together, they comprise the array of material intelligence and sensory capabilities, all formed from subtle but nevertheless material energy. They combinedly manufacture a sense of the self for which the king becomes entranced and falsely identifies. The body itself, the City of Nine Gates, is made of gross material energy of the kind that can be manipulated by ordinary physics and chemistry. The body is powered by the 5 subtle airs listed in the Ayurveda, the Vedic medical science as prana, apana, vyana, samana, and udana. In the Puranjana allegory, the 5 airs comprising the vital force are represented by the 5-headed serpent. Okay, so you can just see here really how covered over we are, how covered over the spirit soul is, what an entanglement we find ourselves in just by this desire to enjoy in the physical body, right? Of course, we have an opportunity also here. We have a choice to pursue the path of yoga, but you can just see that there is a lot going on here. There is a lot to actually maintain, and there is an awful lot to actually control. So a yogi is actually interested in feeding the intelligence through knowledge and through proper practice and through a purificatory practice to be able to guide the soul. In other words, to not become distracted by this vehicle that we're in, to actually use the senses and the mind for yukta vairagya. In other words, to use all these things in renunciation, right? To actually be able to use all these gifts that we've been given to bring us closer to the Supreme. So the process of yoga, in particular process of bhakti yoga, allows us to use all our senses in the service of the absolute truth, right? This takes the schizophrenia out of it. In other words, there are different thoughts, the body is evil and, we should be depriving ourselves. And there's different misconceptions which actually causes distress to us and causes distress to the super soul through a misunderstanding, right? So yes, while this material body is an inconvenience in some way, it's also a gift in another way in which we can be using our sense of smell and taste and speaking and touch and the ability to be able to walk and do different things. For example, to prepare nice foodstuffs to offer to the Lord, right? So in this way, this can become a meditation. Actually, this whole body can be used in service of the Lord. We can dovetail whatever it is we're doing, our occupation, our thoughts, and our activities, all in the process of having our everyday life and activities become one of liberation instead of bondage. So this is the lifestyle of a yogi. This is the art of yoga. Every day, yoga means union. Yoga means to yoke up, so we don't have to feel this fear or this guilt or this, we're going to burn in hell type of misunderstandings and philosophies that abound by not understanding how to use what we've been given successfully. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit more from Dhruta Karma's article. He breaks down the next part of unknown origin. In the allegory, Puranjana also asks about the identity and the origin of the queen and her attendants, and the queen replies, "O best of human beings, I do not know who has begotten me. I cannot speak to you perfectly about this, nor do I know the names or the origins of the associates with me, O great hero. We only know that we are existing in this place. We do not know what will come after. Indeed, we are so foolish that we do not care to understand who has created this beautiful place for our residence. My dear gentlemen, all these men and women with me are known as my friends, and the snake, who always remains awake, protects this city, even during my sleeping hours. So much I know. I do not know anything beyond this. You have somehow or other come here. This is certainly a great fortune for me. I wish all auspicious things for you. You have a great desire to satisfy your senses, and all of my friends and I shall try our best in all respects to fulfill your desires. I have just arranged the city of 9 gates for you, so that you can have all kinds of sense gratification. You may live here for 100 years, and everything for your sense gratification will be supplied." The king's questioning the queen represents the self asking material intelligence for the answers to ultimate questions. The answers provided by the queen, as well as her fundamental attitude, reflect those of modern science, which prides itself on avoidance of certain questions and the tentativeness of whatever answers it may provide. I cannot speak to you perfectly about this. We only know that we are existing in this place. Essentially, the queen provides a monist, materialist answer to the king's questions about the situation, right? But as yogis, as bhakti yogis, we want to go further. We want to understand what the purpose of life is. But again, this whole allegory is just kind of showing us the average person's situation, right? Description of the gates. The Bhagavata Purana then provides a more detailed description of the 9 gates of the city inhabited by the king and the queen. 7 gates are on the surface, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and a mouth, and 2 gates are subterranean, the anus and the genitals. And it gets more detail actually as we go on with this allegory in the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. But here is a summary. 5 gates face east. The first 2 gates on the eastern side are called Kadyota, glowworm, and Avirmukhi, torchlight. To see, the king exits these 2 gates and goes to the city called Vibrajita, clear vision. On the journey, he is accompanied by his friend Duman, the sun, the ruler of the subtle visual sense. So this is the beginning of an indication of how the material body is actually interacting with the elements, right? So we need the sun to be able to see. We need Vayu, right, to be able to breathe for the life airs. We need Agni, fire, for the fire of digestion, and so on and so forth. In other words, the king encounters qualia by sensory contact through the physical gates of the body. Qualia are secondary properties of objects such as color. According to the Bhagavata Purana system, qualia such as color exist as subtle sense objects. They have a reality of their own and are not simply produced within the mind. The king goes out through the gates of the eyes to contact subtle sense objects. In a city of visual impressions suggests that the seeing process is not simply one of passive reception, but may involve an active process of image acquisition, as in sonar radar. This may explain such phenomenon as traveling clairvoyance, whereby a subject can mentally journey to a particular location beyond the range of the physical sense organs and then accurately report visual impressions. Okay. In the eastern part of the King Puranjana city, there are, in addition to the eyes, two gates called Nalini and Nalini, representing the nostrils. The king goes through these two gates with a friend called Avadutta, representing breathing airs to the town of Sarabha, or odor. The last gate on the eastern side is Mukhya, the mouth, through which the king goes with two friends to the towns of taste, sensation, and nourishment. Through the gates on the northern and southern sides, the ears, the king goes to a place where different kinds of sound are heard. Through the gate on the western side of the city, the king goes to the towns where sensations of evacuation and sexual pleasure are experienced. During this journey, the king takes help from two blind men, Nirvak and Peshakskrit, who represent the arms and the legs. Illusory identification. Are you with me? Are you with me so far with this allegory? Illusory identification. In all his activities, the king follows the lead of the queen. In other words, the conscious self in the material world becomes conditioned by the material intelligence. So this is basically going to describe how we begin to falsely identify with the body through the intelligence. So if we're not engaged in yogic activities, then we falsely identify. When the queen drank liquor, King Puranjana also engaged in drinking. When the queen dined, he used to dine with her. And when she chewed, King Puranjana used to chew along with her. When the queen sang, he also sang. And when the queen laughed, he also laughed. When the queen talked loosely, he also talked loosely. And when the queen walked, the king walked behind her. When the queen would stand tall, the king would also stand tall. And when the queen would lie down in bed, he would also follow and lie down with her. When the queen sat, he would also sit. When the queen heard something, he would follow her to hear the same thing. When the queen saw something, the queen would also look at it. And when the queen smelled something, the king would also follow her to smell the same thing. When the queen touched something, the king would also touch it. And when the dear queen was lamenting, the poor king also had to follow her in lamentation. In the same way, when the queen felt enjoyment, he also enjoyed. And when the queen was satisfied, the king also felt satisfaction. As noted above, an important question that arises concerning dualist solutions to the mind-body question is how a non-material conscious mind interacts with the material sense objects. In this model, there is an answer to the question. As seen above, the interaction is based on illusory identification. To understand the nature of this illusory identification, we first need to readjust the familiar mind-body dualism to a triadic conception incorporating a non-materially conscious self, the soul, a subtle material body formed of mind and intelligence, a physical body composed of gross matter, So we're talking about mind-body-soul interaction here. In this model, the mind is a subtle material substance associated with material intelligence. The mind is at the center of the subtle senses, which are in turn connected to the physical sense organs, which bring to the mind sense data in the form of subtle sense objects. In the Bhagavata Purana model, the integrating function is performed by the mind, which receives sensory inputs from the subtle senses grouped around it. The mind is not, however, conscious. The mind is a sense organ. Remember, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says when he's speaking with Arjuna that the mind is the friend of the living entity or his enemy as well, depending on how it's trained by the intelligence. And the intelligence, of course, can be nourished by spiritual practices, right? So it's important to remember that. The mind can help you, but can also drag you down, depending on how you train it. Because ultimately the mind is just there to accept and reject based on whether it finds something pleasing or not pleasing, right? But we have to be our own parent. We have to be adulting in a yogic way. It's very important. So the mind might be compared to multimedia computer software capable of integrating audio and visual materials into a single display, making use of a variety of inputs and source materials. The material intelligence, represented by the queen, directs the living entity's consciousness to the integrated display of sense data. The intelligence, as a subtle material energy, is not itself conscious, but it mimics the behavior of consciousness. So the intelligence attracts the attention of the conscious self, causing the self to identify with it, just as we identify with the image of an actor on a movie screen. By identification with material intelligence, which is in turn connected to the mind's integrated display of sense data, consciousness is connected with the sense data. The connection is not direct. The indirect connection of the conscious self with the gross matter arises from the self's false identification with the action of subtle material energy, intelligence. The extremely subtle material element that connects the conscious self with material intelligence is called ahankara, or false ego. The whole system is set up and directed by the supersoul. Okay, so now we're getting deeper and deeper into it. I mentioned the false ego before, right? So the false ego thinks, oh, I'm doing everything. I am the doer. But someone who is further along in their spiritual understanding understands that everything is being done by the interaction of matter and the soul, or various souls, right? According to the Bhagavata Purana picture, the conscious self originally experiences non-material sense objects through non-material senses. This takes place in the spiritual world with God, but having turned from this original situation, the self is placed in a material body in the material world, identifying with this artificial situation. The self forgets its own nature and that of God, but God remains with the self as a supersoul, the unknown friend. If the self tires of the artificial material reality and desires to return to its original position, the unknown friend will reawaken the original spiritual senses of the self and reconnect them with their spiritual sense objects. Okay, the whole system, therefore, resembles a computer-generated virtual reality. In virtual reality systems, the user's normal sensory inputs are replaced by computer-generated displays. But just as a person can turn off the virtual reality display and return to normal sensory experience, so the conscious self and the artificial sensory environment of the material world can return to its original spiritual sensory experience. And that is the process of self-realization, or yoga. I'm going to take a sip of water. I know that this is a little long today. And I thank you for hanging in here. In the Bhagavata Purana allegory, King Puranjana and his queen enjoyed life for some time in the city of Nine Gates. Eventually, however, the city of Nine Gates comes under attack by a king named Chandavega. Chandavega represents time, and his name literally means very swiftly passing away. Chandavega commands an army of 360 male Gandharva soldiers and their 360 female companions. Together, these represent the days and nights of the year. When Chandavega's army attacks, the five-headed serpent, the vital force, tries to defend the city of Nine Gates. The serpent fights the attackers for 100 years, but eventually becomes weak, his weakness causing anxiety for the king and his associates. Finally, the attacking soldiers overwhelm the defenders of the city of Nine and set the city of Nine Gates ablaze, right? So this is a process of death. When we actually are dying, there's a great fever that comes to the body and everything burns up, right? As it becomes obvious that the battle is being lost, King Puranjana is overcome with anxious thoughts of his wife and his relatives and associates. Then the commander of the invading forces arrests the king and takes him away along with his followers, including the five-headed serpent. As soon as they are gone, the attackers destroy the city of Nine Gates, smashing it to dust. Even as he is being led away, the king cannot remember his unknown friend, the super soul. Instead, he thinks only of his wife, the queen. He then takes another birth, this time as a woman. In this part of the allegory, we see how the conscious self, accompanied by the mind, intelligence, and subtle senses, leaves the gross physical body. When they leave, the gross physical body disintegrates. The conscious self then receives another gross physical body. The kind of body received depends on the condition of the subtle material body, composed of mind, intelligence, and subtle senses. The subtle material body is a template upon which the gross physical body is constructed. This model allows one to account for reports of past life memories, and the Bhagavata Purana model, the mind is a storehouse of memory from past lives. Okay, so this is just an overview. He says here at the end of it, I have extracted only the principal elements of the City of Nine Gates allegory. The complete account is much more detailed and allows one to make an even more subtle and refined model. Self-mind-body interaction. The model does not fit easily into the present categories of mind-body debate, although dualist. It partakes also of idealism and monism. It does, however, allow one to integrate many categories of evidence from normal and paranormal science, as well as evidence from humanity's wisdom traditions, into a rich synthesis, providing fruitful lines of research, confirming and refining a complex dualist model of mind-body interaction. Of course, that is the conference that he was attending. Was trying to explain consciousness and how it fits beyond the Cartesian model. So, to recap, that was a lot of information today. As we know by now, that if you want detail, the Vedic tradition certainly provides a lot of it. So, we're going to be going through this allegory of King Puranjana, which basically is us, which is a soul entangled in a material body and everything that entails, the 10 senses, right, grouped around the mind and the intelligence, the identification or the false identification that we have with this material body known as a false ego or ahankara, right? And the way that the majority of us waste our time using this great gift that we've been given in the wrong way, right? Overly concerned with sense gratification, trying to become happy in this material world. And so we're going to follow the allegory of King Puranjana and how he spends his time, what happens to him, ultimately the anxiety that he experiences ultimately at the end of life because of not focusing on a yogic path, not how shall I say, practicing moderation, right, in all things, and eventually what happens to his body and the process of death, as it were, that everyone is going to experience. Of course, a yogi is trying to take control of his intelligence and therefore his mind and his body and his senses, so he can become a Goswami, right? So he can become a master of the senses instead of being pushed here and there and hither and thither on the whims of the senses. Want to be in control in the driver's seat, and we'll get more into that also. The yantra, the chariot that the soul is sitting in, and all the elements that we are coming in contact with, and the axle of the chariot, pious and impious activities. Whew, it's really quite detailed. So I didn't think that there was really any easy way to do this. I could have skipped right to the end and just described the death process, but without giving you some context, without first understanding what our actual situation is and all the things that go into our existence here, on planet Earth, I thought that it might actually engender more confusion. So I leave you with that today. I appreciate any respectful comments or questions below. And I look forward to seeing you next week for another edition of Mantra Monday. I broadcast here on Facebook, YouTube, and also Twitter. My Instagram channel, normally I will upload this video, once edited a little bit, to my Instagram channel, to IGTV, because Instagram seems to have changed things around a little bit. It used to be that you could just do a live and save that. That doesn't seem to be possible anymore. So if you go on Instagram, there is a whole series on IGTV of Mantra Monday. You can also search through the playlists here on my YouTube channel and go back about 2 years to the beginning of when we started this series. So I wish you a great rest of your week and hope that you find this helpful. Until next Monday, my name is Akayani. Bye-bye now.